Okay.
I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. I'm Dolores Vest. I own Book No Further. It's the independent bookstore in downtown Roanoke on the Roanoke City Market. We have new and like new books, and we especially focus on local and regional authors, which is why we wanted to do this today. We're real excited to have with us the Sinister Quartet. The entire quartet is here with us today. The Sinister Quartet is published by Mythic Delirium Publishing, I guess is the name of the company, and they are known for their creepy kind of writing. So I'm going to hand you over to Mike Allen, who is the publisher at Mythic Delirium, and he's going to introduce the readers, and we will hear from each reader and then have some time for questions at the end. Okay, Mike, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dolores, for hosting this, and thanks to everybody who's come to join us on what here in Roanoke is a bright and sunny Saturday afternoon. And to those of you who don't live in Roanoke who have joined us from other states and other time zones, thank you very much. Roanoke is in not quite the furthest southwest corner of Virginia, but we're close to there if you compare it to Washington, D.C. And we are not the lost colony Roanoke. A lot of people think that we are, and maybe it'd be great for tourism if we were, but no, we are not that Roanoke. That Roanoke is actually in North Carolina. And here in Roanoke, I have kind of a weekday identity as the arts columnist for the Roanoke Times, the local newspaper, among other things. And in my spare time, I am a writer and an editor and publisher, and I have a little outfit called Mythic Delirium Books. And this year, I've put out 2 books, and one of them is the focus of our reading today. And I have little props with me that hopefully some of you will be able to see. This reading is from, let's see if we can get it all in the camera, A Sinister Quartet, which is an anthology of 4 long stories, a short novel and 3 novellas that is modeled kind of loosely on what Stephen King did with Different Seasons, and Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, did with Strange Weather. So you get this sort of quartet of stories of varying levels of wonder and terror. And this one's by 4 authors, and I am one of the authors, but I am not going to talk about what I do as a writer first. I'm going to have each of the contributors to A Sinister Quartet introduce themselves in the order in which they appear in the book, and that is also the order in which I'm going to have everybody read. And the first story in A Sinister Quartet, it's actually a short novel, The Twice Drowned Saint, was written by World Fantasy Award winner C.S.E. Cooney. And in a way, I think it's wonderful that we're doing this via Zoom, because it would have probably been pretty challenging to get Claire here and Jess here for an in-person reading in Roanoke. But they can be here now in this format. And Claire, why don't you, once you're unmuted, tell folks who you are and what you do.
All right. And are we all introducing ourselves first and then reading? Is that how we're doing it?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
That's my concept.
I'm Claire. I write under the name C.S.E. Cooney, and I've worked with Mike before because he published my collection of short stories, Bone Swans, which did win the World Fantasy Award. Last year with Tor.com, my novella / short novel, since I seem to be having a problem with word count these days and end up writing short novels instead of novellas, Desdemona and the Deep came out with Tor.com last July. And in the spring of 2022, I will be having my first, what I would consider real novel, that was intended to be a novel and not a novella, come out with Rebellion Publishing, called Saint Death's Daughter. And I'm just very pleased to be here with my friends. And I totally would have come to Roanoke. I love Roanoke, and I will come again when this plague is over.
We loved having you here when you were here, and we'd love to get more people here. Thank you, Claire. And the next person in the anthology is Jessica P. Wick, who contributed an eerie novella called An Unkindness. And Jess, how about I just let you talk about yourself instead of me doing it for you, like I'm very tempted to try to do.
I mean, as much as I would like to hear you just riff on what you think my biography is or should be, I will step in here and say hello to everybody, and thank you so much for being here, not just for an event that I'm taking part of and my friends are taking part of, but supporting your local indie is very, very important to me. So yay, thank you for supporting a local indie in Roanoke. I really appreciate it. I'm a freelance editor, reviewer, poet, author. You can find various and sundry things I've written online if you just Google Jessica P. Wick, or go to jessicapwick.com, which is a very, very, very rough website, but you're still welcome to go there, and sort of like a double horror story for you there. And An Unkindness is a novella that means a lot to me. I wrote it partly for my little brother, and it's, well, you will see if you buy the book or if you just listen to us talk about them a little bit. And that's me.
Thank you, Jess. Okay, so the next person in order of appearance in the book is Amanda J. McGee, who is, if you are a Roanoker, who is the other local author in the book aside from myself. Very, very pleased to have her represented in the book. And Amanda, let's have you introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Amanda, and this is my debut novella. And then I've also self-published a couple different works in the past. So probably the thing that most people who have read me are familiar with is this one, which is Mother of Creation, which is a dark epic fantasy. Mike's like, look, I'm repping it. So, so that I'm all my stuff, you can find out more about me at amandajmcgee.com. I do a lot of different things. So I blog pretty frequently about books and different things. And I also have a podcast that I'm kind of doing for fun with a friend of mine. And so plenty of places to find out more about me and my content. And you can find all about it on my website. So.
Cool deal. Okay, so back to me. I am also a contributor to a Sinister Quartet. This is kind of an experiment for me, actually, to be a contributor to an anthology as well as the publisher of an anthology. But the novella of mine, which is called The Comforter, that is in a Sinister Quartet, is actually, though I mean for it to stand alone, it is actually a sequel to a couple of stories that appear in what was my debut horror story collection, Unseaming, that came out in 2016. The story that opens Unseaming, which is called The Button Bin, was a finalist for the Nebula Award when it came out. And there's a second story that's a sequel called The Quilt Maker. And The Comforter is the third story in the series. So I'm thrilled, you know, I'm thrilled for it to have a home and for it to be with such great company. And I also have a new collection of spooky stories that just came out with this, you know, very with this very cute and adorable cover called Aftermath of an Industrial Accident. And my novella in A Sinister Quartet also ties to some of the stories that are in here. Though, as far, you know, I do not think that you have to buy all 3 books to enjoy the individual stories. I would, of course, love it if you bought all 3 books and all of Claire's and all of Claire's and all of Amanda's and anything that Jess is in. But you know, if you're here just to listen, that's great too. So having introduced everybody, why don't we go ahead and get straight to the readings. Claire, I hope I am not stealing your thunder in any way to also mention that your novel within Sinister Quartet is also connected to one of the stories in your World Fantasy Award winning collection, Bone Swans. So there's all kinds of neat ties and connections, further ways that you can find these stories rewarding, just, you know, beyond reading what's in the covers. And I'm going to pass the baton back to Claire.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. The full title of my short novel is The Twice Drowned Saint, Being a Tale of Fabulous Galethal, the Invisible Wonders Who Rule There, and the Apostates Who Try to Escape Its Walls. And I want to call your attention to Brett Massey's interior design here of a big eyeball inside a diamond. That's important. But maybe we won't get to why in this particular reading. You have to know that Galethal is a fabulous city. It's fabulous, and it is within a diamond of ice. That's basically like a wall of ice in a diamond shape, a huge, what they call the Serac. And it's in the middle of a desert, and the city, Galethal, is ruled by angels. But do not think of the angels that you immediately think of when I say the word angels. Just imagine the weirdest, bizarrest, kind of monstrous, different morality, if any, than what we have. And then imagine who they choose as their saints. I'm going to read from chapter 10, Alazar's Diegesis. And you just need to know that there is the 7th angel, Alazar, and he has 2 saints, which angels aren't supposed to have. Every angel is supposed to have 1 saint. And the 2 saints are on a rooftop, having met for the first time, getting really drunk together. The narrator is the first saint. She's been Alazar's buddy for a long time. So, Saint Bettany. Bettany lolled her head to the side. She was lying on her stomach on the lounge chair, the angel Alazar sort of hovering over her shoulders, giving her a massage with a view of his trumpet-like blossoms and golden tendrils and wingtips. Being massaged by flowers may not seem substantial, but I knew from experience that the 7th angel's attentions could penetrate the naughtiest of muscle clusters. I took a long, slow sip of benison wine, or, as the laity like to call it, beer. Tell me, are the angels shitting themselves in the celestial cenobite over your resurrection? She flashed her half-lidded raptor eyes in my direction before lifting her head from her arms and nose-diving into her own tankard. Yup. And what does that look like? I pressed. Bettany emerged, bearded with foam. Looks like a bunch of saints in fleeky trim ramming up my door and demanding answers for their angels. She snorted, mostly stuff like, what's he doing with Godhead powers anyway? And who the filthy fuck are you, cherub, that he pulled you from the dead water? I was impressed. Cloistered saints say fuck? Not in so many words, but she took another drink. Yup. Saints can be such little shits, I said. Bettany flopped over onto her back to stare up at the hovering wing and eyeball figure that was the angel Alazar. I'm your shit, bug, she told him solemnly, and so is Colette. The two best shits an angel without an anus could wish for, replied the seventh angel, fondly. I laughed so hard I almost rolled off my lounge chair. But as the empty cup I was holding had spontaneously begun to refill itself, I very carefully sat up straighter and held on to it with two hands, and I was amply rewarded for my care. Alizar was all about the venison wine tonight. The drunker Bettany and I got, the more gleeful he became, and his glee bubbled over as beer. Beer foamed and fountained out of our cups. It was perfect, crisp and tangy. It practically purred. Drinking it was like drinking a cat made out of amber lager and molten caramel and ripe red cherries. I licked my lips. It ain't, Bettany hesitated, turning toward me. It ain't bad, where I'm at. My new steak? Saints aside, it's thump swaggy. I don't mean to belly whistle about it. I'm clean, new kit. She gestured to her clothes. Servants, food. The food, Caleth. Forget beer. I could get drunk on food alone. The clinic, that place they put me. The celestial Cenobie, I said grandly, not at all overpronouncing all of my vowels and consonants. At all. Yeah, that. Her eyes became huge, luminous with wonder, and not a little fear. I'd live there forever, sure. Gladly. Part of me didn't even want to leave tonight, not even to meet you, bugkin. She smiled at me tiredly, as if knowing I would understand. Know the last time I got a bed to myself? When I didn't pay ass over teeth for? I shook my head. Me neither. Part of me... Bettany broke off, swinging her legs over the side of the lounge chair and heaving herself to a sitting position. Her shoulders crunched forward desolately. I panged for her, then realized, a bit startled, that I'd sat up at the exact same time she had, in a mirror position. Part of me wants to thank that little hair shirt for whacking my cap and dragging me here to die, because without Ali and his sweet smoke dream of... She slid a sideways glance at me. Fabulous fucking Galethel. I leaned forward, breaking our symmetry, to take her hand in mine and squeeze them. Without him, you wouldn't be here. Yeah, that's it. Why? Bettany whispered. Why am I here, Caleth? Why me? Anybody else, they get drowned in a bathtub, they stay drowned. Why'd I get the regalia? The answer seemed obvious. Nerwin chose you, didn't she? You're her holy sign. You're who Alizar has been waiting. I'm no kind of holy. I'm not even religious, Bettany protested. And if I were, I wouldn't worship Nerwin. Back in Cherub Town, there was all this talk about her being some kind of new god among us. You heard Allie mention it, right? I nodded. Well, I never saw a rag of her, Bettany confessed. Me and Scratch, my friend, my only friend, war vet, got her face burnt off in the firebombing of Sorrow Ranch. We used to go around the tents, sort of taking the pulse of Cherub Town, you know? Place is a powder keg. We were out last night and... Was it last night? She looked around confused, as if freshly astonished that only a day had passed since then. I waited, wondering if this was what eternity felt like, and Alizar hovered nearer, patting Bettany's head gently with various of his protrusions until she regained her bearings and continued. Last night we came upon a tent meeting of the new religious, watched all the preachers preaching and the converts praising Nerwin's name, and I turned to Scratch and said, got no use for a god who walks around this trash fire without taking the trouble to fix it. I'd sooner worship the god king of Kosvar, may his dick fall off. And Scratch said, hell's bet, it's enough to make a gal a goddamn atheist. And then we left early. That's all I can remember about last night. Guess Allie saw me leaving that tent and took me for some angel-defiling heathen, then cracked me. Realizing she was crying, a slow seeping weep, Bettany rolled contemptuous eyes at herself. I stroked her hands with my thumbs until she snipped it all back in and wiped her face on her shoulder. Anyway, that's why I'm here. Didn't do nothing special but raise a brother ready to murder me or martyr himself at a pin's pull. The other saints, they're right to look at me like I'm a sand leech, sucking the dark side of their thongs. I don't belong here. But Caleth, Bettany leaned in, all the way in. I'm staying. I'll eat their food, wear their clothes, stare at them 14 fucking angels till somebody decides to toss my dead body off that ice wall. I ain't going back. A faint thrum in the air, a coruscating disquiet alerted me that Alazar was overwrought. All glee gone, all beer evaporated by his anxiety and anger, he shimmered and buzzed, busy with emotion. He wanted to reassure her badly, but he was stymied by his own secrets, by his and Nerwin's long-standing ambitions, by all the ineffable things mere mortals could not comprehend. So he said and did nothing to comfort Bettany in her doubt. Well, sometimes Alazar just needed to be prodded a bit, like the rest of us. I understood exactly what he needed and what Bettany needed, so I reflected the question back at her and brought all my saintliness to bear, going down on my knees before her and squeezing her hands even more tightly. Why you? I asked, my upturned gaze on her and her alone. Why did Alazar the 11-eyed, seventh angel of Galethel, reeve of bower, whose feast is bloom, defender of the diamond of Belisar, choose you, Saint Bettany? Answer me that. She began to shake her head in that way she had. So I asked again, demanded, urgently, why did Alazar choose you? Because I am not of Galethel, Bettany answered promptly. And I saw, shimmering on her lips, the fluttering of tiny crystal chip wings. I glanced around and smiled in satisfaction. Alazar had vanished from sight, only to have remanifested in the mouth of his newest saint. Bettany clapped a hand over her lips, but that didn't stop him. Alazar kept on talking through her mouth. He even used one of her hands to pluck the other from her lips and hold it in her lap, giving it the occasional avuncular pat. Because I've walked this world with my own 2 feet, Bettany went on, faster and faster, speaking with the fervent tenderness her angel held for her. Because I've seen the worst and broken for the better, because I'm fast and sly and can lie quicker than thought, because I'm good with a penknife, and he likes my hair, because I kept my shitty baby brother alive even when it cost me everything, because I can infiltrate the... She stopped short, shook her head once, sharply, then blurted, because I can infiltrate the celestial cenobite. I sat back on my heels, my knees creaking, and loosened my grip on her hands. She did not pull away, and I did not let go. And why, I lowered my voice, does the angel Alazar want you to do that? This time, I felt the fluttering of wings on my own lips, a flickering glow in my throat, and we both answered together. Because he is making his bid for Godhead of Galethel. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it took me a little bit to find the unmute button. Thank you, Claire. I was reading along as you were as you were reading that. It was extra delightful. You know, hatching plans to overthrow a god. Well, actually, the god's already overthrown, but I shouldn't give too much away. If any of that intrigues you, please check out Claire's story. And next we have an excerpt from An Unkindness by Jessica P. Wick.
Hello again. So all you need to know to understand this excerpt is Ravenna is a princess, a very willful princess, and her older brother, Olivier, has been behaving unlike he's used to behave. They have a very close relationship, and she's decided to take matters into her own hands and follow him. As sometimes happens when you poke into your sibling's business, she finds out he's going to a creepy otherworld underneath their palace fountain, and he seems to be getting into mischief. And this is an excerpt right after she finds him at a ball. Let's see. The last thing I wanted to do was dance, especially in case the owl woman saw and asked how my oath had been concluded so quickly. And so I lurked. I am quite good at lurking at balls. The key is to be in constant motion and always on the periphery. I found a refreshment table and I lurked there, but touched none of the food. I found a table with a game of cards and I lurked there until the players made noises as if I should join them. The cards they used looked nothing like any deck I have ever seen. I lurked beside a little silver bear who I mistook for a statue at first, until she asked me for the name of a color. You've forgotten the word? I said cautiously. I came here to get the name of a color. I want the name of the color of your hair. You will give it to me. Then I will have it, she replied, frowning. Oh, will I forget the word? I tried to keep my voice light, but I think perhaps a wee bit of how unsettled I felt crept through. The silver bear seemed to loom. I cannot remember the name. Give it to me. There was a rumbly kind of imperative in the request and a darkness to her eyes. My calf throbbed. The darkness in her eyes became fibrous, matched by the darkness leaking from her mouth. Oh, I couldn't say, I told her and moved on. The dancers never rested. The music grew wilder and lovelier, and more like a sparkling display of mysterious objects translated to sound and given a heart. Candles burned down and were replaced. Musicians with their eyes shut tightly were replaced, their bloody fingers painted in salve and wrapped carefully in fabric. And Olivier whirled with the glittering woman. He didn't seem to grow tired any more than the other guests did. If I hadn't been in such a panic, I would have been very, very bored. To keep my mind alert and my attention on course, I began to plan what I would do next. Some people become overwhelmed by the future, I know, but I am the opposite. My pen pal Erdith has said she thinks my mode of planning for the future is a steadying influence on me. Perhaps my interest in history. Ever since a tutor drew the idea to my attention, it has seemed to me that one has time to plan the accomplishment of even the most elaborate goals when one considers the scope of history. I like lists. They make me feel calm and in control. First, I would follow Olivier home. At breakfast, I would tell him just because he spent all his nights dancing in a secret fairyland, that was no reason to behave as he was behaving. He would say, Ravenna, I don't know what you mean. And I would say, Olivier, you really must give me more credit. I know we didn't bet, but if we had, I would be the winner. Even father couldn't contest that because I followed you. And if that creepsome, shivery, enchanting world makes you happy, I am happy for you. Because, imaginary breakfast Olivier, I miss you. I miss you so much. And so does everyone else. Surely, we can work out a schedule wherein you follow your heart without taking your lack of sleep out on those who heretofore have adored and supported you. The imaginary conversation dissolved when the scream began. The scream crawled under my skin and scratched at my bones and went on and on. I sometimes think I still hear the echo of it. The dancers barely slowed, but the other guests began to chatter in that hushed, expectant way of a crowd that already knows what manner of surprise is for it. There came a hand hard on my elbow, and a voice like a chip of light on black glass in my ear. Careful now. I batted at the hand and turned toward the voice. It belonged to a young man, black hair oiled in antiquated waves, wearing the face of a raven. Beneath the raven's long beak was a pillowy mouth and an anticipatory smile. Had he taken the face from a man with a raven's head, like the swan-headed gatekeepers, and placed it atop his own. Was that blood cooling between the feathers, crusting at the edges of his skin? "Do you like my mask?" he said cheerfully. "My sister has its match. You wouldn't believe the trouble they took to get. The previous owner did not want to give them up. This is your first ball thrown by Princess Kiss while the melancholy evening silvers, isn't it? You must choose a more judicious vantage point. And if you return, don't forget your own mask. Do you not own one yet? Have you considered weasel or ermine? Something in its winter coat?" Without waiting for a response, he steered me forcibly toward a pillar. The scream took on a shredded quality, but the edges still cut. My throat was raw, listening to it. He looked at me so expectantly, I stopped looking wildly about and gathered up my dignity. "Your mask is atrocious. I suspect it suits you very well," I said. Then, more pleading than I'd like to remember, "Let go my arm and tell me, what is that sound?" He did release my arm, placing a finger against the tip of his beak. Then he pointed. I saw the unicorn. At least, I think it was a unicorn. It was as small as a doe, bright as light on water, and wounded. Sometimes as it fled through the crowd, it stumbled and seemed to have the shape of a man. Mostly it ran on 4 hooves. Wherever it went, the unicorn left behind silver liquid, viscous as honey. Its belly was open, and ropes of something hung toward the ground. The something seemed very much as if it shouldn't hang like that. The guests applauded when it fell against somebody's legs, tangled its horn in a sword hanging from a belt, or in a cluster of ribbons dripping from a wrist, whenever it seemed to look for help. They laughed politely, as if it were a common game, and sometimes with real delight. Coming up on the unicorn's trail were 6 men, each handsome, all repugnant. 2 held bows ready, arrows notched. I looked to see my brother's expression, but could only find the back of his head. His hands, they were raised, and still, mid-clap. The other 4 had clubs and silver bloody hands. One wore a crown of candles burning, tallow in rivulets down his earlobes like his earrings, his jaw, his neat trimmed beard. Another a stag's crown, antlers thrusting from his forehead, moss dripping like lace from the tines. Another had an eagle on a leash, which seized one guest's wig and dropped it on another's head to general amusement. The guests pressed close, but from my vantage I saw it all. How the unicorn collapsed at last, and did not move except to breathe and roll its head. How one guest threw up her skirts and pretended to ride the horn. How an old man with a sketch pad came forward to do a hurried sketch, dipping his charcoal into the silvery blood after. I saw him kiss it and lick his lips. The hunters with their bows, their notched arrows, approached it from 2 sides. I waited for Olivier to say something. He was right there. There was silver on his shoes. They shot the unicorn. Its sides had not stopped heaving when their knives flashed and they began to carve stakes from its flanks. The glittering woman raised a hand and closed her fingers into a fist. Her fist conjured silence. All ceased chattering, squawking, growling, tumbling, clapping. I would have spoken, but I didn't, so it doesn't matter saying so. I knew if I opened my mouth, I would vomit. Then, in the perfect silence, which was a perfect stage. The glittering woman fed Olivier a sliver of unicorn meat with her own fingers. I threw up on Raven Mask's shoes. They were fine shoes before I vomited on them. Blue velvet with silver tassels shaped like foxgloves and fastened in place by bird talons. The vomit's yellow did not set them off. Raven Mask was moved to say, ugh, but he held my hair back. Does he think it's cake? I whispered, like thinking leaves are gold. Unlikely, Raven Mask whispered back, unless you hunt cakes in the world above. Who invited you here, darling? You're so springy. The glittering woman called for a cup. An appreciative murmur went through the room. Peals of laughter, scattered bursts of applause. I'll pay for your shoes. When does this end? I asked. After the dead lord in waiting toasts the dance. You couldn't afford my shoes, my sister. I stopped listening because the hunters were hauling the unicorn onto a table. It shrieked desperately. It was still alive. And one was pressing a cup into the glittering woman's hand. The cup was green glass like the garden's gate, and it caught light from her. Olivier grinned. The last time I saw Olivier grin like that was at the turn of the year, before his best friend died, before he'd gone cold and secretive and stopped liking us. He took off his shirt. There was a scar on his chest. The woman stroked it, and Did I start forward? I want to think I did. I need to think I did. I believe Raven Mask held me back, but I'm not sure. I am a coward. I am a coward. Nobody so much as glanced towards me except a plain woman with sharp eyes. The one I almost knocked over earlier who seemed so familiar. Everybody else was intent and happy, licking their chops like cats at feeding time, except perhaps the hunters, who stood blank as a cracked bone. They opened my brother's chest and cut out a piece of his heart. He did not, contrary to my expectations, die. Instead, he dropped the meat into the green glass cup, and it was bloody and disgusting. He toasted the company, and they all drank from the same cup. It never ran dry.
Mike, you're muted.
Yeah, I thought I was
Back.
unmuted. Now I'm back. I love that scene. Of course I would. But I love it because it chills me so. Well, so I guess shifting from the fairy realm to a story with a fairy tale at its heart. Let's have Amanda McGee read next.
All right. This is my turn. So I'm gonna read from Viridian, which I don't know if you can see this, but that's the inside cover page, and I love it because it's got a little key on it. All right. And I'm gonna read a brief excerpt from chapter 8, and then a brief excerpt after that, and they go together. And what has happened up to this point is our main character, her name is Lori, has moved to Vermont in order to restart her life after the death of her sister, and has met a mysterious man. Ethan and Lori disembark from the black SUV. The cold bites into Lori instantly. Her feet in their warm hiking boots slip on the slick ground. Ethan wraps his arms around her, catching her, and she laughs. I got these boots so I wouldn't slip. I think you need to take them back then, Ethan jokes. They walk inside through the entryway with its stone facade and heavy wooden doors that Lori longs to stroke. The room beyond is 2 stories, grandiose, filled with light and emptiness and a set of stairs that stretch up like a dream. The marble of the floor and stairway is ivory with blue-gray veins, the walls a cool dove gray. It's beautiful, if a little cold. This is amazing, Laurie says. Ethan just smiles. He leads her to the right through an open arch into the wing of the house that parallels the lake. The endless wall of windows Laurie saw during their approach, golden and gleaming, spreads before them now black with the weight of night. In this room is a fireplace, a dining table set out of a fairy tale, and a woman all in black. Her face is lined with age, her hair silver, her expression severe above her black-collared shirt. "Sir," she says, "welcome home." Now is not the time for Laurie to balk, but the idea that Ethan might have in-home waitstaff never occurred to her. She knew he was rich, but this is a different level of affluence, one that elevates him well above the household Laurie grew up in with its upper-crust desires. Ruth would be proud if she and Ruth still spoke. Laurie walks into the room, wrestling with her sudden tension. The woman takes her coat and scarf and gloves, and Ethan's as well. Ethan pulls out a chair for Laurie at the beautiful table. The rug under their feet is probably worth more than the value of her car. Laurie feels underdressed, though Ethan has on a sweater and jeans just like her. Laurie sits down. Ethan pushes in the chair and seats himself. The woman returns with wine, a dry white, Laurie's favorite kind. "I'm sorry," Laurie says, interrupting the pour of the pale golden liquid. "I didn't catch your name." "Of course, ma'am," the woman says. "You may call me Eleanor." Eleanor turns to Ethan's glass. Ethan smiles past her at Laurie. "Nora's been with my family for a long time. She and Paul practically raised me," Ethan says. "They'll eat later, though. I wanted this evening to be just the two of us." "Paul?" Laurie asks. "Nora's husband," Ethan says dismissively. "He's the groundskeeper." Laurie swallows. Eleanor steps back from the table, her face impassive. "Dinner will be ready in just a moment," she says. Laurie looks down at her clean porcelain plate, at the silver table settings, and the vast, empty expanse of the table. Eleanor is gone by the time she looks up, vanishing back into the kitchen. "Would you like to hear some music?" Ethan asks. He roots around in his pocket, sets something soothing and low to playing in the background. Laurie reminds herself that she feels comfortable with Ethan, which she obviously wouldn't have to do if she felt comfortable, but here they are. Eleanor reappears with bread and salads. Laurie asks for blue cheese dressing. Ethan gets balsamic. She cannot understand why her heart is pounding. They've talked about the highlights of their respective days in the car, and now she has nothing to say. Laurie eats her salad slowly, stretching the bites. Outside, the blackness presses, except when it is broken by a flurry of white. "You may get snowed in here," Ethan says. Laurie gulps her wine. It makes a warm nest in her stomach, smooths the edges of her panic enough for her to waggle her eyebrows suggestively. Ethan laughs. Laurie finds herself smiling in answer, though she can feel sweat prickling on her body from misspent adrenaline. Eleanor returns with the turkey, stuffed and glistening, which she carves onto their plates. There is a trencher of cranberry sauce and of gravy. There are mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese, more soft bread, and salty butter. Laurie hasn't had a traditional Thanksgiving meal in years. She and Annie always had tacos for Thanksgiving. Neither of them had particularly liked Thanksgiving as a holiday, but they liked tacos. Each year they tried new toppings: pickled cabbage, teriyaki chicken, daikon, pulled pork. For a moment, Laurie can see her sister in the dark glass of the nearest window. Her face is still with death. Her eyes are black. She opens her mouth, and there is a void inside, an ending. Lori? Ethan asks, and Lori tears her gaze away. The insulation of the alcohol is burning from her. She smiles shakily. I'm sorry, she says. What were you saying? How do you like the turkey? Ethan asks. Lori looks down at her plate. At some point she has taken a bite, but she doesn't remember that flavor. The inside of her mouth tastes sour. It's good, she says, looking back up, smoothing her smile to something natural, she hopes. She does not look at the windows again. The fourth wife was named Veronica. She never knew she was dying until death lay on her like a blanket. Ethan went by his own name with her because she was beautiful and because he had almost given up on killing. Veronica's parents called her Ronnie. She loved them, but disliked the name. Her father was a fan of folk music. He played the guitar on Wednesdays with all of his old friends at a bar in the next valley over, and Veronica went with him to sing sometimes. Not long before she died, Veronica lost both of her parents in a car accident. She never guessed that it was Ethan's fault. After all, he loved her. And he did. Ethan loved Veronica's long black hair, her bright blue eyes. He loved the way she laughed and how a curse word from her lips came out sharp with barbs. But in the end, he could not choose freedom in her arms, not knowing how she would look at him if he knew him for who he truly was. Never mind that he was the one who made himself that way. Veronica wore a small black dress to their anniversary dinner. She drank her wine red and bitter and didn't notice the other flavors even as her words slurred and the world faded out into nothing but bright glimpses of memory and the comfort of a place to lie down. She never knew that death was coming, and so she never feared it. Her last breath left her peacefully. The fear came after.
I love that bit too, especially with the fourth wife. I need to ask everybody to forgive me for just 1 second while I step away from the computer, but I will be right back.
Uh-oh, we're losing our next reader, everyone. Quickly, step in and fill the breach.
Would anyone like to see my cat?
Yes.
There he is. I think I can't.
Oh.
There he is.
Is he always that rowdy? Is he always that rowdy?
Oh, yeah.
Oops, he's back. Oh.
Just watching everybody else read, I realized, wow, I really underdressed for this. I need to up my ante here. Well, you know, you've heard from the other three members of the quartet that I feel so privileged to be able to perform with, you know, both in the pages of that book and in these readings. And I'm now going to share with you a couple bits from my story, The Comforter, and I'm going to offer kind of an advance apology because there's a pair of chapters that I have been kind of routinely reading as my representation of what's in The Comforter, and I felt like doing something different this time, but these are not chapters that I have rehearsed before, so I apologize if there's any flubbing. There are a couple of things that you need to know at this point in the story. I'm going to share an excerpt from chapter 10 and then chapter 11, and the story centers on two children. There are a lot of characters, but it centers on two children, one named Maddie and one named Davy. And both of these are introduced in the previous story, The Quilt Maker. And, you know, Maddie survived a fairly terrible ordeal and is now she has a foster mom now, and she's trying to kind of resume you know, as much of a normal life as she can. Davy, the other child, something very, very terrible has happened to Davy. And there's a third there's a third child or young adult who you will meet in chapter 11, named Josie. And when you meet Josie at this point of the story, all the readers will already know at this point that she was, let's say, possessed by a monster. But she's not in this next chapter that I'm going to read, chapter 10, but she'll come up soon. And this is chapter 10 from The Comforter. The placemats, silverware, china, artfully arranged on the dining table, constitute a farce, as neither of you possess human appetites. Yet your mother insists. You sit across from her, you say the grace she taught you. No food dirties the plates. You live in a small barren house in one of the oldest, most run-down Hillcrest neighborhoods. With so many of the rooms empty of furniture, a visitor who walked through without encountering the inhabitants might well assume no one lived there. The elderly man listed as the owner in city records belongs to your mother now. She says, "Tell me about your day, Davy." "I spied," you say. She regards you with the same dark eyes she had before she joined with a monster. She's a striking woman with her dark hair in a bob and full lips prone to wry smiles. She looks dressed to the nines, made up for a night on the town. It means nothing. With a thought, she can make herself look however she wants. You lack that range of flex. When you want to look like Davy, when she demands that of you, you always end up wearing the same clothes unless you change, physically remove the new outfit and put one on. Her mastery of her state borders on godlike, and yet of late something's been wrong with her. What face did you use and what did you see? She asks. And when she speaks, her voice splits, an old man's voice bleeding into hers, and her mouth splits too, fissuring in a diagonal that slashes through her lips. The moment she stops talking, the bizarre wound is gone. You know better now than to remark upon it. Her name is Carolyn. She's a janitor. She lives alone. Her house is full of dead cats. There were a few left alive. I locked them out of the house. I hope they find someplace else to go. Your mother smirks. I approve. At school, hardly anyone pays her any mind. She can get in anywhere. Your mother steeples her fingers. You know what she wants to hear. What did you do? Now, at this point, the author is going to intervene to tell you that what Davy describes as to what he did that day is incredibly disturbing. And you're going to need to just take my word for it, but I'm going to skip it in this reading. And when he is done describing this, his mother asks, "So no one saw you in any form?" "No one." You're not lying, but sampling the shreds of psychic aura left after that violation was an afterthought, something you nearly forgot to follow through on in your distracted state, something you needed to share with your mother to keep you out of the box under her bed. You can't afford to lose days on end again. You watched Maddie all day, from the moment she stepped off her bus to the moment she climbed back on again. Your mother can't know that. She must never, ever find out. You watched Maddie search under her desk in Mr. Newman's room, and the sight warmed your topmost layers, but you didn't leave her a note. You don't know how to say what you want to say. And now we go to chapter 11, which picks up with Maddie. Lunch period promises to be more of the same. Maddie reminds herself things could be worse. She hasn't been picked on in many months. Becca's book bag, printed deep blue with rainbow flower constellations, stands sentry in the chair across from Maddie, the rest of their corner table unoccupied. Becca's in the lunch line, her dark frizzy hair not quite contained in a ponytail that looks like it's about to slip loose, her short, slumped body further bulked in a heavy coat and sweater, even though the winter's well over. Maddie's not really excited to see her. They live in the same part of town, but aren't close. Becca talks compulsively about many things that Maddie really doesn't care about. But Maddie thinks that Becca knows this on some level and is just grateful not to have to eat lunch alone. It's not like Becca ever asks what she thinks. She just talks, no harm, no foul. Becca's presence at her table helps to keep others away, and Maddie's fine with that. When Josie pulls back the chair to Maddie's left and sits down, a lightning bolt might as well have burned a message in her lunch tray. The development is that unexpected. Maddie's spine stiffens and her shoulders pinch together. This is a prelude to a bullying for certain. Josie's never been somebody who makes a show of being a bully to impress her friends, not that Maddie knows about, but consider the odds. Josie's in 9th grade, just a couple months from graduating junior high, and Maddie's a pudgy 8th grade wallflower. Josie's tall and buxom for her age, blonde as a Viking, top class grades, a scion of old money, turns heads whatever she's wearing, and carries herself like she's already high school royalty. Rumor among the distaff population is she snagged a boyfriend way older, proof in some quarters that she's already a goddess among aspiring women. Maddie thinks that's icky, but she would never say it aloud because the backlash would be instant. Josie might not be a bully, but plenty of people would pick on an easy target for the chance to impress her. Why did you erase that skull you drew on your desk? Josie says. Now we're through the looking glass. Maddie has no words, but what? That skull. Why'd you erase it? I thought it was ridiculously awesome. Maddie can only stare until words practically volunteer of their own accord. I didn't erase it. Her mind is racing. Someone else did. She'd spied on the other classes in that room and never seen Josie. The note maker. Just author insertion. There's a mysterious person who keeps leaving notes for Maddie under her desk. The note maker had requested that drawing. So you must draw a bunch, Josie goes on. Can I see? A cafeteria lady gives Becca's lunch card a swipe through the reader. Becca stuffs it back in her purse, picks up her tray laden with the latest unappetizing selection, turns and spots Josie sitting at their table. Becca's jaw drops. Maddie quick scans the room, catches entire groups of her fellow pupils quickly looking away, others not bothering to hide their stares. Come on, show me, Josie says. Does Josie know about the notes? Is she involved somehow? She can't imagine a more unlikely scenario, but a minute ago, the notion of Josie taking an interest in her would have seemed as remote as the moon. Maddie's never seen Josie walk into Mr. Newman's classroom. but she's not there all hours of the day, is she? Josie waves a hand in front of Maddie's face. Hello, I'm serious. I want to peek. Becca walks up, her bug-eyed alarm a comical reflection of Maddie's own shock. I hope I don't look like that, Maddie thinks, and snaps out of her paralysis. She can hear Mama Rochelle's voice scolding. Maybe there's more to Josie than you know. It's fine, sure. Maddie starts digging in her backpack. Becca sits down. Josie smiles at her, says, Hey, Becca. A lunch period full of firsts. Maddie has a black and white marbled cover composition book that she uses as a cheap sketch pad. It's about half full of doodles that she doesn't even show to Mama Rochelle. She knows what would happen if she did. She's not stupid. Another voice in her mind hisses, Don't trust Josie. Don't let her see. She might laugh. She might squeal, ooh, gross. She might tell the principal that Maddie's disturbed. Maybe worse, she might love what's in those drawings. Thinking about the notes left under her desk, Maddie teases the composition book out of her backpack. Becca, taking her seat, sees the composition book come out and raises her eyebrows and bugs her eyes, which has the effect of turning her round, plump face into a clown mask. I hope you've got a strong stomach, she says, even though she's not looking at Josie. She's watching Maddie's hands as the cover folds open. Becca had to beg for days before Maddie showed her those drawings, and once she saw them, she didn't like them at all. Becca doesn't quite understand the unpleasant tightening that clenches in her chest. Part of her really doesn't want to view those drawings again. Part of her is contemplating how brainy, pretty, fashion plate Josie gets to see Maddie's darkest secrets after asking only once. Josie hunkers closer, eyes fever bright as she scans the thick shadows made by ballpoint pen. Amazeballs, she says. Becca mutters aloud, Amazeballs? Who says that? Then remembers the risk she's taking and puts a hand over her mouth. Josie doesn't react. She leans closer to Maddie. May I? Josie touches the pages, spreads them flatter. Beneath her pink-painted nails, a furious doodle floods the paper to the edges. Faces stretched like taffy, distorted into squares, their corners tied together like handkerchiefs. Every mouth contorts an exaggerated grimace. Some eye holes are filled in black, others contain huge and bloodshot orbs, little black veins forking like lightning strikes toward floating irises. Page turn. A huge mouth takes up both the facing leaves of paper, the space between the upper and lower sets of teeth colored in by frenetic black scribbles with blocky letters left white within the darkness. They spell out the words, Mommy, isn't that funny? Page turn. Figures that register as human only in the crudest sense. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, are swirled into an epic spiral that funnels to a single point near the center, as if the viewer looks down into a whirlpool choked with human-shaped sheets. I've got an art project I'm trying to get done. It's due tomorrow and I'm just not happy with it, Josie says. I was wondering if you could help me out. Wow, are you sure? For the first time, Maddie looks close at Josie's face. She's got everything Maddie doesn't. Unblemished skin, a tiny nose, huge wide-set green eyes. Maybe there's more makeup on her cheeks than Maddie first realized, though of course it's expertly blended. A faint floral scent caresses the air between them, and there's another stranger scent beneath, as if the crackle of a fireplace has been transmuted into candy. Maddie's nostrils flare, and she lets a shudder slip before she catches herself. The underlying odor summons a vignette of her missing mother in her denim jacket, turning in the driver's seat, reaching toward her to buckle her in, wearily scolding, "Hold still." Josie smiles ever so slightly in acknowledgement of the scrutiny, but on her face, even the slight crinkle that springs to the corners of her eyes glows like a warm sunrise. "Could you come by my house tonight?" Maddie's heart leaps, then sinks. "I don't have a ride." Mama Rochelle would never agree to this. She can't leave all the kids at home alone in the evening to give one a ride. She and Ashley had a big argument a couple months ago, and Rochelle said that over and over. "Don't worry, my mom will pick you up. All I have to do is tell her your address." Maddie starts and doesn't know what to say next. Is that what rich moms do, she thinks? Chauffeur their little princesses wherever they want to go? An ache accompanies the thought, as if it's imbued with longing rather than snark. "I'm really grateful you're willing to help me. You're crazy good at drawing." A warmth spreads through her, touched off by the unexpected praise from someone so much further up in hierarchy, that heat precipitating as a blush that deepens as soon as she realizes she's blushing. She fidgets with her composition book, quickly flipping pages, creating a non sequitur montage of screaming faces and skulls interlocked in Escher fashion. She steals a glance at Becca, searching for guidance, sympathy, perhaps a reflection of her own astonishment, mutual amazement that this improbable thing is actually happening. Becca's mouth has shrunken in sullen disapproval, and her eyes don't blink. "I need to go. I should let you finish lunch," Josie says. "Just give me your address and your cell number. My mom will come by your house when she gets off work. She'll call first to let you know she's on the way. That ought to leave you time to do your own homework if you need it." Becca finally speaks. "Why can't she just come straight home with you from school?" Maddie cringes inside, but at the same time, she recognizes it's a sensible question. "I'm not going straight home. My boyfriend's picking me up." Becca's jaw drops, then snaps shut. Josie actually gives Maddie her cell number and asks for Maddie's address again. "Text it to me." Maddie does. "See you tonight," Josie says, and then she's gone. Stone silence hangs between the girls in Josie's absence. Becca, instead of peppering Maddie with questions, wolfs down her lunch. Across the cafeteria, Carolyn, the janitor, ties up a full trash bag and lifts it out of the can. She watches Maddie and Becca, her gaze veiled beneath crude-cut bangs. And that's the end of chapter 11. And I think that's where I'm going to stop. So I guess Dolores, should all the other Sinisters unmute now? And we can see if anyone has questions for
We'll
us.
see if anybody has questions. You can share them in the chat room and we will ask them. I have a couple of questions myself to get started. And what do you, each of the writers, what do you think is the origin of you wanting to write sinister stories? You know, we all grow up, we're going to write the happy little once upon a time stories that we're reading when we're 3, 4, 5, and 6, but somewhere you took a turn and took a different focus. Tell us about how you think it led you to this particular kind of writing.
I have an answer to this for me. Does anybody else want to go first?
I just don't write sinister stories.
Claire, why don't you elaborate on that?
Tell us some more.
Well, I mean, I write about angels and saints. Yeah, and swans, princesses, things like that. No, they're not sinister at all. You just have to Read it when you want something sweet and hopeful.
Okay, Amanda.
I don't know. I think it's just it's more interesting, probably. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say there was like one particular like kickoff moment for me. I think I've always been interested in kind of darker things.
Jessica, how about you?
Well, when I was little, my favorite version of The Little Mermaid was the original version, which does not end very happily for the mermaid. I was also very obsessed with Swan Lake. I actually like have a print over there of like Trina Shart Hyman's Swan Lake, and it also does not end very happily. I always liked the darker stories, but I also really enjoy pranking people and being delightfully mischievous, just delightfully mischievous. At the bookshop where I work, we divided all of the staff just for fun into like the villain team and the good team. I did not choose my team. My team was chosen for me. And the team that even like the new kid who had only known me for a week at the time, although this is not to say that I'm the evil fate or anything, I just want that on the record. But even the new kid was like, oh yeah, she's on the villain team, right? She's because of all the villainy things she does. And I just like getting the reaction and, you know, sort of bringing people to where they don't expect. And I feel like I love reading a happy story, a story with a good, like happy, satisfying ending. But I feel like once you're approaching that, it's maybe a little easier to spot. Whereas if it's something that has a bit of darkness or a little bit of amorality, you never quite know where you're going to end up. And I like to pounce people. So that's my answer.
Those are good answers. Let me ask this. Do you ever scare yourself with your own writing? Do you ever creep yourself out? Like, where did that come from?
I am a wuss. I am very much a wuss. I feel like I've always written darker things. I think even Claire, I read her a piece of a novel that has since disappeared in a computer crash. And I remember her like asking me if I thought it was horror. And I was like, what, horror? I don't even like horror movies. I'm scared. Oh my God, are we talking about horror? What is that noise in the other room? Hold on 1 second. So I scare myself very, very, very easily. So yes, I do creep myself out when I write stuff sometimes.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I held my answer for last because I knew I'd probably yap for just a little bit. I actually know when the exact moment was when the shift from happy stories to dark stories, you know, was first implanted, and it was in the 3rd grade when our 3rd grade teacher, well-meaningly, read as a Halloween treat to the class The Telltale Heart and the Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And somehow at that age, I had just never encountered a story like that. I think it has a lot to do with kind of it has a lot to do with kind of my upbringing. I was born in Minnesota, but you know I lived on Guam, and my parents, you know, I think a way I could put it is my parents were not people who participated in pop culture, and so at the end of that reading in 3rd grade, you know, the other kids who had pulled their desks into a circle were like, oh, that was cool, whereas I was like, you know, and my brain just became consumed with imagery from Edgar Allan Poe, and I actually began having I actually began having night terrors from it. And so to not, turn this into like an hour therapy session, my identity today as a horror writer evolved. It evolved out of my younger self, trying to wrestle with the imagery and with the questions and the issues raised in Poe's stories, about about mortality, about grief, and I actually, in my other book that's out right now, it actually opens with a piece that is about this very thing, called 6 Waking Nightmares Poe Gave Me in 3rd grade. And in my teen years, I guess kind of the moment where I sort of crossed over from someone who had night terrors to someone who enjoyed horror came about when I discovered Clive Barker's collection of short stories, The Books of Blood. I mean, those really, I mean, I had by that point read H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King, and kind of the horror names that most everybody knows who knows horror. But something about Barker's stories really fired my imagination, in a way that made me, didn't just scare me, but made me also want to create. And so that's my very specific story as to why I often write horror. Now, what Jess was just saying was also true about, I think stories with elements of darkness are more fun to write because they're harder, and they're more fun to read for me because they're harder to predict, because there's no guarantee of the happily ever after that comes with many other genres. And Claire, I think I just saw you raise a hand just now. Oh, that's a thumbs up. Thank you.
Well, I want to say something when you're done, if you don't mind.
Okay. That's probably enough of an answer for that. So sure, go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, childhood, and I think I was raised on steadily dark stories from pretty young, kind of, but like in the way that Poe is dark when you're a child, like being raised on Sweeney Todd is, gives you a certain mindset. But Sweeney Todd is also a comedy on top of being about serial killers who eat people in pies. And I feel like I don't think of that kind of darkness as horror, because I think of it as comedy, which is, when I think about what I write, I don't think I write horror, though there are horrific elements. But if Sweeney Todd on the one hand, or like Phantom of the Opera on the other, monsters who kidnap people and strangle them, but there's such pageantry in it. So it's fantastical because of the costumes, or because of the music, or the theatricality of it. I feel like if I were to talk about the way I write, it's like the fantasticness and like the weird comedy of being in a really dark situation speaks more to me than horror. Though I did read Clive Barker and Stephen King and Poe. I didn't really read Lovecraft until later. Don't mind that I didn't really, but yeah, I feel it's an interesting, because I never think of myself as a horror writer, but there is blood. There will be blood.
Thank goodness.
I wanted to say something about that, because like one of the scariest memories I have as a kid is watching the animated version of The Hobbit, when the orcs are like coming down and they all get run up the trees and they're singing and everything. You don't think of The Hobbit as a horror story by any means, but I think like there has to be an element of darkness in something to like really perpetuate that conflict. And I think back to even like those standard like fantasy elements like in Tolkien as like having those elements in them is just not quite the same genre, right? So it's actually sort of accidental to like slide into the horror genre, I think, to kind of echo maybe some of Claire's sentiments there.
I'll second that. That, you know, I remember being creeped out by that same cartoon, but also loving that cartoon. You know, there was a whole era of like adaptations of books into cartoons back then, where the cartoons were actually pretty scary. The Hobbit was one. Watership Down apparently traumatized thousands of children. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe had an animated adaptation that was very dark, that I also remember loving.
Or Jess, The Last Unicorn.
Yeah.
All wonderful, wonderful cartoons.
Well, we're coming up close on our end time here. Would each of you just take a minute and tell us what you're working on next and what you're looking forward to, besides the end of the pandemic?
Claire, go first.
Sure. My husband and I are collaborating on a screenplay for a small, for a low budget film. A colleague of ours is doing, he has his center in Brooklyn. Anyway, we have done our first draft. We're working on our second draft. I am working on edits for the novel that's coming out in 2022, Saint Death's Daughter, with Rebellion Publishing. And I just today started Salise's Laundries. I mean to put out a collection of some of my early Dark Breakers novellas, which preceded Desdemona and the Deep. Mike may be helping me with that. And
perhaps
have the first two Dark Breakers, which is the Breaker Queen and the two Paupers, which I self-published, and they were reprinted. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but I hope to have new stories in it too. And I started the first of my ideas for those new stories today. Longhand, which I really love.
Jess?
So right now, I have a couple freelance projects where I'm editing for other people, so that's my focus for the next couple weeks. But I am deep in the middle of a swashbuckly novel that does actually have a little call out in an unkindness, so potentially they are the same world at different times. Swashbuckly novel filled with horror, but definitely not a horror novel. And I'm also working on like a shorter ghost story once I get done with projects for other people.
Amanda?
So I am working, I'm querying a project, and I'm also writing a project, and they both happen to be urban fantasies, which apparently is not a super great market to be querying or writing in right now, but I'm very excited about both of them. So, and then, you know, continuing to work on kind of, right, Claire points out that markets change, and she is correct. And then, but one of them is a kind of a post-pandemic semi-zombie story with like werewolves and gallivanting. And one of them is the one that is currently a work in progress is more of a like murder mystery with wizards set in New York City. So they've both been great fun to work on. So
I guess it's my turn. So I have a horror novel that I finished drafting back in January, and I am there's been a lot of stuff going on, you folks might have noticed, but I've been trying to get back to doing the first revision of that. That novel also has some connections to some of the stories I've mentioned in these other books, but even before I get to that, I have a short story that I am in, excuse me, in the middle of writing right now, in hopes of submitting it to a market that opened a couple days ago, and I just realized that editor has been here. You listening to us. Hi, Roanoke. I hope to send you something. And a weird, oh, should I say this? Well, why not? A weird thing about this story is that I am once again revisiting the world of the button bin, which the reason, I mean, you might say, well, why is that odd? You've written 2 sequels, but that was never the plan. You know, the story wasn't supposed to keep going, but there's something about it that just keeps that just keeps drawing me back to that horrible, horrible world. But I mean that in an affectionate way. You know, publishing wise, you know, because I have this sideline with publishing too. Obviously, I have books to promote, and you know, including what we just did today. Thank you, Dolores, for once again for having us and letting us do this. And there are a couple of new books. It might even be an exaggeration to say they're in the works at this point. Let's just say there have been discussions, and hopefully there will be more news about these books by other people, not by me, later this year or early next year. And so things continue.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the guests
Thank
that have
you.
heard these wonderful samples today, and I hope they make you even more excited about reading more. This is our 3rd Zoom event, and we're kind of getting a little more practice with them. We do have another one next Friday with an author, Lee Ning, who was chosen to be in this year's version of Writers of the Future. And that is a book that writers writing about the future, but they are young writers and just beginning, so they are the writers of the future as well. That's at 4 o'clock on Friday, and you can sign up for that Zoom event just like you did this one. Please do visit our website if you get a chance, and we do feature our local authors and like to promote them as best we can. And let's thank everybody again for coming today, and we will hope to see you here again soon. Thank you.